Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know this story's really grabbed the internet's attention, and honestly, it's grabbed ours too. We're talking about Luigi Mangione, the guy who's suspected of murdering the CEO of United Healthcare and like the whole hashtag Free Luigi thing.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, you don't see this kind of reaction every day.
Definitely not. So we're diving into a Newsweek article about it, and there's this whole Reddit thread online at the Onion that's just blowing up about it. We're trying to get to the bottom of why this story's gotten so huge and like what it says about us, as a society.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case, especially because it seems to be tapping into all these anxieties people have these days, particularly when it comes to healthcare.
It's true. Okay, so to set the scene, we've got this murder mystery that's like straight out of a movie. Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot and killed. And it happened in broad daylight right in Midtown Manhattan. But it wasn't random, it was targeted.
Right, and that's one of the things that makes it so intriguing, right? The fact that he was alone and whoever did this went after him specifically. It wasn't just some random act of violence.
And then on top of that, you have the bullet casings. They were marked with depose, deny, and delay. It's like something you'd see in a revenge thriller.
Yeah, it's like straight out of Hollywood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we have our suspect, Luigi Mangione, 26 years old.
Yeah, what's the deal with this guy?
Well, when they caught him, he had a ghost gun, a suppressor, and like a whole manifesto about how messed up the American healthcare system is.
Oh, wow.
But get this. His alleged social media handles were at Pep Mangione on X and at luigi.from.fiji on Instagram.
What?
No, seriously.
That's crazy, the irony.
I know, right?
It's like this happy-go-lucky persona online and then this super serious accusation.
Totally. And here's where the internet comes in. As soon as the details of the case and like Mangino's background came out, this hashtag Free Luigi just exploded. It's everywhere on X, Instagram, all over the place.
Wow, so people are actually rallying behind him.
Oh, yeah. Some people are even calling him a hero.
A hero. I mean, it's interesting because this case is really tapping into this much bigger feeling, right? Like a lot of people feel like the healthcare system is just rigged against them, That's all about profits and not about people actually getting the care they need.
And that's definitely reflected in how people are reacting to this online. I mean, you've got memes comparing Mangione to, like, Tony Soprano. There are jokes about starting a GoFundMe for his defense. People are even making merchandise.
Seriously. Merchandise.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
It's like he's become this, like, folk hero for some people, this symbol of someone who stood up to this system that they see as corrupt and unfair.
And some of the comments online are, well, they're pretty wild. There's this one X user at Circle Sauce. They tweeted, "He's only guilty of being hot."
Oh my gosh.
I know. It's like the fact that someone was killed was getting totally lost in all the online hype.
That's really disturbing. That lack of empathy for the victim. It's part of this trend we're seeing where people can just detach from the real world consequences of things,
Yeah.
They focus on building these narratives that fit their worldview, even if it means ignoring the actual harm that was done.
It makes you think about the role these platforms play in all of this. They have these algorithms that are designed to keep us engaged. But I wonder if they also end up pushing us toward more extreme content.
That's a great point.
There's this whole other layer to this case, too. So there was this McDonald's worker who identified Mangione, right? But he's not getting the reward money because Mangione hasn't been officially charged with murder yet. And on Reddit, some people are saying this is a good thing because it discourages snitching.
Oh, wow.
But that seems to be missing the point entirely, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, this idea of snitching is interesting because it connects to this bigger question about justice, right?
Right.
Especially when people feel like the system has failed them. Like, we see this in the Reddit thread where people are talking about jury nullification.
Jury nullification. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that.
Okay, so basically it's when a jury decides to acquit someone, even if they believe they're guilty of the crime. They do it because they disagree with the law itself or how it's being applied. And in this case, some people are saying Mangione should be acquitted even if he did shoot the CEO, because they see what he did as a justified response to a corrupt healthcare system.
So it's less about the actual crime and more about sending a message.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not just about one man and his actions. It's about a system that a lot of people feel is broken.
Healing.
And the lengths that they're willing to go to express their discontent. It forces us to ask, like, if people feel like the traditional ways of creating change have failed them, do they feel justified in taking matters into their own hands?
It's a really tough question, and it's one we're going to keep exploring. But first, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on the hashtag #FreeLuigi phenomenon and what it tells us about the state of our society.
This whole Mangione thing it's really got me thinking. It's like we're holding up a mirror to society and seeing all these cracks, all this dissatisfaction bubbling up.
Yeah, I agree. It's like Mangione, whether he meant to or not, has become this lightning rod for all that anger people have towards the healthcare system.
And it's not just a few isolated voices, it's like a whole chorus of frustration.
Mhm.
Even in the Newsweek article, they talk about how this case has unleashed this wave of anger and resentment, especially from folks who've been through the ringer with the healthcare
Oh,
system.
absolutely. I mean, you see it in that TikTok video from that ER nurse, right? The one who said she has zero sympathy for the CEO.
Yeah, I saw that one. She's seen firsthand what insurance companies can do to people, how they deny coverage, delay treatment, all to protect their profits. Her perspective, coming from someone who deals with the human cost of these issues every single day, it's powerful. It really hits home.
It's hard to ignore that kind of raw emotion, you know what I mean? It makes you realize that this isn't just some abstract policy debate happening in some ivory tower. It's about real people, real lives being impacted, sometimes tragically, by a system that feels rigged against them.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not just healthcare workers who are feeling it either. You go on that Reddit thread and it's just story after story of people dealing with insurance nightmares, facing these outrageous medical bills, living with the fear of getting sick and ending up bankrupt.
Right. It's like a shared trauma almost. It
Right.
cuts across political lines, income levels, everything. So many people feel trapped in this system that seems designed to exploit them at their most vulnerable moment.
Exactly. It's that feeling of vulnerability, that sense that you're powerless against this giant machine that doesn't care about you as an individual, that really fuels the anger and the outrage. It's like when you feel like the system is ignoring you, you start looking for other ways to make your voice heard.
And that's where the online world comes in, right?
Yeah.
Social media, with its algorithms that are designed to keep us scrolling and clicking, they can create these echo chambers where those feelings of frustration and anger get amplified.
So it's like a vicious cycle, right?
It can be. People
Mhm.
find others who share their frustrations,
Yeah.
and they kind of feed off each other's energy, and it can escalate quickly.
So in a way, this whole hashtag Free Luigi thing, it's bigger than Mangione himself, right? He's just become this symbol, this focal point for this whole movement of people who are fed up with the status quo.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that collective frustration, that sense that something needs to change. But the big question is, where do we go from here? How do we channel this anger into something constructive?
Because even if you hate the system, even if you feel like it's completely failed you, celebrating violence, like actually condoning someone taking a life, that's a dangerous road to go down.
It is, absolutely, and we have to be really careful about that. Like, advocating for change, fighting for a better system, that's one thing. But condoning violence, even against someone who represents a system you despise, that's crossing a line.
We need to find ways to have these difficult conversations to address the root causes of these problems, but without falling into these online outrage cycles that just lead to more division and more anger.
Right. It's about finding that balance. Like, how do we acknowledge and validate those feelings of anger and frustration without letting them spiral out of control?
And how do we do that when the platforms themselves are designed to keep us hooked on that kind of emotional content? It feels like an uphill battle.
It is a challenge, no doubt, but I think it starts with awareness, with understanding how these algorithms work, how they shape the information we see and the emotions we experience. We can't just passively consume whatever is thrown at us. We have to be more conscious of the content we engage with, the conversations we participate in.
So it's about developing that healthy skepticism, being more critical of what we see online.
Yeah, especially with emotionally charged topics like this one. It's about cultivating media literacy skills, learning to distinguish between credible sources and misinformation, understanding how our own biases can influence our judgment.
And it's about being open to having those tough conversations, right? The ones that make us scream a little, the ones that challenge our own beliefs.
Absolutely, engaging in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views, that's essential. It's not about trying to convert them to your side, but about understanding where they're coming from and finding common ground. It's about recognizing that even in the midst of strong emotions, there's always room for nuance and empathy.
So it's less about shutting down conversations and more about figuring out how to make them more productive, more meaningful.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where people can engage with each other in a more thoughtful and respectful way, even when they disagree.
That's a great point. But how do we do that on a larger scale? I mean, these platforms are designed to amplify outrage and division. It seems like such a huge challenge to shift that dynamic.
It is a huge challenge, no doubt, but I think it's a challenge worth taking on. And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at the psychology behind online radicalization, the role of algorithms in amplifying extreme viewpoints, and some potential strategies for creating a more constructive online environment.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into this whole hashtag Free Luigi thing, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what does this whole story say about how we as a society process information, especially online?
Yeah, it's really eye-opening, right? I mean, it shows how these online communities can be so powerful. On the one hand, they give us this incredible ability to connect with people, to share our experiences and find support, like we were talking about with the healthcare system, people finding others who understand their frustrations.
Right, that sense of solidarity.
Exactly. But then there's that flip side, right? Those same things that allow for those connections can also create these echo chambers where information gets distorted and like extreme viewpoints start to dominate.
It's like that game of telephone, right? The
hmm
message keeps getting passed around, and by the end, it's totally different from where it started.
Yeah, and often it's the outrage that takes over.
Yeah.
And that's when things can get really, really dangerous.
Because we've seen it happen before, haven't we? Like, that anger online can spill over into real-world actions, and that can have really serious, sometimes even tragic consequences.
It's a growing concern, especially as those lines between online and offline continue to blur. You know what I mean? Like the internet can become this breeding ground for radicalization, and the algorithms, well, they're designed to keep us engaged, but they can also trap us in these filter bubbles.
So we end up in these online spaces where all we see are the same opinions, the same viewpoints, even if they're like totally extreme or unfounded.
Exactly, and it can be really hard to break out of that once you're in it.
So how do we navigate this digital landscape without like falling prey to those echo chambers? It feels like a minefield out there.
It is a challenge, but I think the first step is awareness. We need to understand that these algorithms exist, and we need to be aware of how they're influencing the information we see. We can't just passively consume whatever's put in front of us.
hmm
We have to be critical thinkers, questioning what we see and actively seeking out different perspectives.
So it's about developing that healthy sense of skepticism, right? Like
Yeah.
not just taking everything we see online as the gospel truth, especially when it comes to these really emotionally charged topics.
Exactly. It's about cultivating those media literacy skills,
Mhm.
being able to spot misinformation, to identify credible sources, to understand how our own biases might be shaping our perceptions.
And it's about being open to those uncomfortable conversations, right? The ones that challenge our own viewpoints, the ones that make us think a little harder.
Absolutely. I mean, engaging in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views, that's so important. It's not about trying to convince them that you're right. It's about understanding where they're coming from and maybe even finding some common ground.
It's about moving beyond the shouting matches and actually trying to have a productive conversation.
Exactly. Creating that space for thoughtful and respectful dialogue, even when there's disagreement, that's what we need more of.
It's a tall order, for sure.
It is. But it all starts with us, right? With the choices we make online, the information we consume, the conversations we participate in, those all contribute to shaping that online world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think it's this. Don't let the algorithms control your worldview. Don't let the outrage consume you. Be critical thinkers, be open-minded, and be willing to engage in those tough conversations.
And remember, even amidst all the chaos and noise of the internet, there's always room for nuance, for empathy, for those meaningful connections. This whole case, this whole hashtag Free Luigi thing, it's a reminder that what we do online matters. It has real-world implications, and those lines are only getting blurrier.
And it highlights the importance of being informed and engaged citizens, both online and offline.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and as always, keep those minds curious.